the attack happened, and we saw a lot of people running all directions, and the police arrived very quickly. So
okay, Pablo, we're having trouble with your phone signal, so we're going to try to improve the connection so we can continue the conversation with you. Please work with our producers in the control room. We'll find a way to get that signal to bring you back. As we try to do that, Peter Bergen, again, that the police were so quickly, perhaps based on information they have that we don't, but pretty quickly saying very likely a terrorist attack. You see reports from the scene, 2 armed men entering a restaurant after a van hits a crowd. Vehicles have become a recurring part of these stories, especially in these populated western cities.
Yeah, 14 vehicle attacks since 2014, John, almost 12 of them jihadi terrorist attacks, ISIS-inspired. You know, unfortunately, the death toll can be pretty high. You will recall, of course, the Nice, France attack on Bastille Day, July 14th, that killed 84 people. Recall the Berlin Christmas market attack that killed 12 people. And so, you know, if the perpetrator, as it seems to be the case in this case, has a large enough vehicle, a van, and, you know, accelerates at 80 kilometers an hour into a crowded tourist region, a crowded tourist spot, you're unfortunately going to see quite a number of injuries and even fatalities.
And you can see even from the pictures, if you've been with us the past few minutes, the police presence, we see more vehicles, more officers as this situation unfolds. And in most of these cases, am I right, Peter, when it has been a terrorist attack using a vehicle, in most of these cases it has been a singular attack, one vehicle. So obviously one of the questions the police will be having in the region is there something else? Is this part of something bigger? But in most of these cases, and this is why they're so hard to A, advance detect, and then B, to stop as they play out, you get 2 or 3 people in a vehicle and they ram a crowd.
Right. Quite a number of these have been so-called lone wolf or lone actor attacks. In this case, we seem to have 2 perpetrators. Reminds me a little bit of the attack, John, on London Bridge, where they rammed into people on the bridge and then they went over to an area near London Bridge and tried to attack people in neighboring pubs. And it was a group of you know, more than one person. So you know, terrorists, like school shooters, learn from previous incidents and they study them. And unfortunately, this seems to be a mix of 2 different tactics here: the vehicle attack that kills or maims quite a number of people, and then you know, essentially setting up a barricade siege situation inside a restaurant, and sort of sustaining the media coverage for as long as possible, because they unfortunately will likely take hostages and try and spin this out for as long as possible.
Right, and those are the details we're trying to get. You're listening to the voice of Peter Bergen, our CNN terrorism analyst, and as Peter notes, we are told by authorities we're told by eyewitnesses, 2 men apparently leaving a van after it rammed into a crowd. We're trying to get an extent of the scope of the injuries. We're told there are many. Eyewitnesses say the 2 men have since retreated into a restaurant. The question there is, are they hiding, or as Peter notes, are they trying to take hostages and provoke a standoff? You see from the pictures heavy law enforcement presence on the scene there in central Barcelona. Joining me now on the phone is our CNN Chief National Security Correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Jim, any information you have, number one, about what happened, and B, just about the history in this area when obviously U.S. agencies joining other allied agencies trying to share and get as much information as they can. What do we know?
I've been speaking, John, to European security sources, and of course their initial read is that this is an act of terrorism. It bears all the hallmarks. A couple notes about Barcelona. Barcelona has a militant population there that security authorities are aware of. It is isolated. It is hard to penetrate, as they often are. There are a lot of Pakistani immigrants, Moroccans, the Pakistanis with ties to Lakhtar Taiba, which is a large, very powerful Pakistani terrorist group that's carried out some horrific attacks in Pakistan.
Jim, I want to jump in. I'm sorry, apologies, Jim. I just want to jump in for 1 second because we're getting some new information. This is from TV-E24, state-run television in Spain, now saying at least 1 person has been killed 20 injured in what they say is most likely, probably, a terrorist attack. My apologies, Jim Sciutto, continue.
No problem at all. The other point I would make is when you look at the modus operandi here, this looks very similar to the attack in London a few weeks ago, right? Remember the attack on Borough Market started with a ramming attack, and then those men went through the market there bars with knives and attacked more. It appears these men may have guns, or maybe the gunshots are coming from authorities. Regardless, again, it fits that kind of pattern. But this is a community there that authorities have been aware of, a militant community, difficult for them to get tabs on, as they often are. You think of those communities in Brussels that we've reported on before, in Molenbeek, small, hard to get inside, and therefore hard to get vision on what plans these kinds of groups, these kind of actors have coming up.
And Jim, to that point, when counterterrorism agencies around the world have these conversations and they try to learn the lessons of Paris, the lessons of several attacks in London, now we're watching this scene unfold, and again, our early information will change, obviously, over the course of the hours and days ahead. Have there been any, in these conversations, any new conversations about how, this is so hard, as I was discussing with Peter Bergen, 2 or 3 people, you don't need a lot of planning. You get into a van, you go to a popular tourist site, as we have here in central Barcelona. What is the conversation among counterterrorism and security officials about what, if anything, and I think if anything is the hard part, they can do to try to stop these?
Well, one point is this. Particularly after the Paris attacks in November of 2015, there had been a lot of criticism about the lack of sufficient intel sharing among the European intelligence agencies, and even some questionable sharing inside countries, that the police weren't talking to the intel services, etc. Since then, and I've heard this from U.S. intelligence officials, but also Europeans, their sharing has been a lot better. They've been doing a better job of that. But remember, when we've covered acts of terrorism in France and elsewhere, they have a lot of jihadi suspects to follow, too many for them to follow everyone. And that's why so often when you have these attacks, you have folks who were actually on the police radar, and yet they were able to carry out these attacks because it's just not physically possible to follow everyone.
Right. An important point you make, Jim. Stand by 1 second. I just want to update our viewers. Authorities say they're still looking for the driver. You're seeing these pictures here, split screen, we're getting from affiliates in Barcelona, Spain. You see police cordoning off the area, other police officers walking about, police vehicles as well. That presence has dramatically increased in the last 20-plus minutes as they respond to this scene. Again, from eyewitnesses and from the local police, a white van said to crash into a crowd of people. TVE, state-run TV in Spain, reporting 1 dead, at least 20 injured in this attack in central Barcelona. Jim Sciutto, you were talking about the criticism about information sharing, intelligence sharing between and among the European intelligence agencies. That reminded me there was a big dust-up after the recent London attack where even the Prime Minister of Great Britain criticized the United States because U.S. intelligence or law enforcement agencies leaked some photos, and there was some tension there. As we speak today, that obviously involved the U.S. and the U.K., not the United States and Spain. But is there any indication that there's any barriers, any frustration, any tensions, or has that been resolved between the United States and its partners in Europe?
Well, the and I hear this from both sides, on the U.S. side and the European side, the transatlantic cooperation has been very strong, even predating Paris. There's been a lot of information going back and forth to U.S. close allies over there, and the U.S., frankly, has resources they just don't have in terms of surveillance, etc., not to mention military presence in the battlefield where a lot of these plots are ginned up, right, Syria, etc. So, yes, there was that dust-up following about the U.S. releasing more information than the Brits wanted, but in terms of counter-terror cooperation, intelligence sharing, I don't hear criticism across the Atlantic, right? It seems that those channels are open and wide, and the cooperation is very strong.
Jim, stand by. I just want to keep our viewers posted on what we're seeing. What you're seeing there on 2 screens, the rising police presence in central Barcelona, the Las Ramblas area of Barcelona, if you're familiar with it. Obviously a thriving city, a big tourist attraction. Eyewitnesses and local authorities saying a white van crashed into a crowd of people. TVE in Spain now reporting 1 dead, at least 20 injured. Eyewitnesses saying they believe that it was deliberate. the driving into the ramming of the crowd there, and another eyewitness saying 2 armed men have run into a local restaurant at that scene. What we're trying to ascertain now from local authorities, and obviously they're responding to the crime scene. They are not being as quick with information. They may not have a lot of this information about where are those 2 men, have they been located, what is the police presence in the area, has there been any contact or communication. Authorities do say they are still looking for the driver of that van, and as you watch these pictures, obvious guidance, I guess, but worth repeating. The Spanish authorities saying if you are in Barcelona, stay away from this area, and if you are in the actual square where this happened, be careful, do not move about randomly, and communicate with the local authorities who are there. Again, at least 1 person dead, 20 injured after a van plowed into a crowd of people in Barcelona, and the authorities saying this is most likely, probably, a terrorist attack. Jim Sciutto, as we continue the conversation, you have been through too many of these in different parts of the world. What is happening in these counterterrorism centers, in these law enforcement centers, starting in Barcelona, but obviously around Spain and then around Europe and the United States, where people try to get information and try to help?
Here's a challenge, is that the radicalization process has quickened. I've been hearing this for months, that it used to be that it would take months or perhaps years to cultivate a terror recruit. And now the word is that it can happen in a matter of weeks, that someone watching enough videos online, going to Islamist chat rooms, etc., can go from invisible, not known to be a threat, to carrying out an attack. And that makes it, when that timeline is shorter, it makes it difficult, sometimes impossible, to interrupt it, because it could be someone who came out of nowhere. You had no idea they were a threat. That is a real concern. The other point I would make, John, just in light of the last few days in our country, 5 days apart, you've had a white nationalist and what appears to be terrorists in the UK use a vehicle to kill someone, right? And just as a matter of parallels, you hear the same thing about how white nationalists, and keep in mind that violent extremism in the U.S. is often just as much from that category as from the Islamist category. They are also being radicalized online and often very quickly. So you have, I mean, the parallels are remarkable.
Hi, Jim Sciutto, stand by, continue your reporting. I just want to update our viewers on what we're seeing here. Authorities now saying more than 1 have died in this attack in central Barcelona, Spain, that they are attributing as a probable terrorist attack. More than 1. We don't have a more definite number. Apologies, but that's what happens early on in these situations. More than 1, we are now told, it's being reported by state TV, have been killed in this attack in central Barcelona. A van ramming in to a crowd of people. 20 or more have been injured. Again, eyewitnesses say they believe it was intentional, a white van ramming into a crowd. Authorities are saying they believe this to be most likely a terrorist attack. Eyewitnesses also saying 2 gunmen took refuge in a local restaurant. The question now is, are they hiding? Is there a hostage situation? Is there a standoff? We're trying to get more information on that as the situation develops. You see the heavy law enforcement presence on the scene there. We're going to take a very quick break, continue our reporting, but much more on this breaking news story straight out of Barcelona, Spain, when we return in just a moment.